Hey, great day. So in this car chit chat, let's talk about the importance of relationship capital and how I was able to write myself into multiple grants working with a community nonprofit agency doing what I love. Hey, great day, y'all. Welcome back to the Car Chit Chat. So let's talk about relationship capital. And I want to do a little bit of story time because some people on the YouTube channel have asked, can I talk more about how I have been able to leverage my private practice and take my expertise out into the community? And so I've been working with one particular nonprofit for probably about 11 to 12 years now. Honestly, I stopped keeping count after I said 10 years, but I've been saying 10 years for the last 2 years. So I'm gonna chalk that up to probably 11 to 12. So I'm a clinical psychologist located in Southern California. I used to work at Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. I used to work for Juvenile Justice. And so a little bit of context of where I worked, which would explain why I do what I do right now, is in juvenile justice. I was originally placed in a juvenile camp that was in Lancaster, about, plus 60, heck, it felt like 100 miles out of where I lived at. And I lived in Compton at the time. And so I worked at the camp. The camp, you want to think about it as where the kids get sentenced and then they go to camp, which is like baby prison. So they, at that time, were going to camp 3, 6, 9. It was very infrequent if we would get them in for 12 months. 12 months really meant that they violated their probation probably when they were in camp. Probation sent them back to court multiple times. And then it was just like, you're not learning your lesson, we're going to extend your time. But I rarely saw anybody who was outright sentenced for 12 months outside of, I think, 1 or 2 kids that had gotten released, and they just kept violating their probation outside of jail. So the court was like, okay, this is like your 4th or 5th time going to camp. And so hopefully this is going to work because they're trying to prevent these kids from, I'm gonna say, graduating into the adult system. So I worked at the camp for 1.5 years. I did a 4-10 schedule, which meant that I worked 10-hour days, either 8 to 5 or 9 to 6 or something like that. And I worked Sunday through Wednesday. So I always had Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And during that time, that's when I started building my part-time private practice, usually on Friday, because I wanted Thursday off. Y'all got to rest and reset. And then I moved it into Saturday, half day, so I had the rest of Saturday, to enjoy. So that's where I started. And then over time, I actually prefer the camp hands down because it gave me a chance not to have to work by myself in silo. It also gave me the opportunity to see like staff and team members because we couldn't really see any kids for mental health services unless it was an emergency when they were in school. So we were doing a lot of paperwork, we were sharing offices. And so I personally preferred the camp. So I decided to transfer closer to home because I more so got tired of the drive. I had the joke of like, I go to work when it's dark, I come home when it's dark. That's not fun in my early 30s. So I made the choice to transfer into Juvenile Hall. And what I did, and this is like a pro tip, if you work at a bigger agency that allows you to do overtime in other facilities, do it so that you can see if you would like it. So I had tested out working at Twin Towers, downtown Los Angeles, on Saturdays. I'm gonna just keep that short. I did not like it. I think I did it for like 2 months. I probably did like 6 or 7 Saturdays. It was more interesting when I would run into some people from the neighborhood. One guy in particular, he saw me when I was doing like my tour. He was like, Takesha. And the people, other psychologists were looking at me that were not of, blackness. And they were like, you know them? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, oh my God. That was like so interesting and embarrassing at the same damn time. But I went ahead and waved back, you feel me? And so, anyways, I did Twin Towers, but I did not like it because it was just like another beast of like, I literally saw me looking at the computer screen, looking at someone's whole history Some people were just here 7 days ago and got released and are back in jail. And they're telling me they've never been to jail. And I'm just looking like, you think I'm boo-boo the fool? You know what I'm saying? And so with adults, I was way more like cutthroat, like straight up, versus kids. Because kids, everybody got a reason as to why they lie. But kids, I feel like, want you to see them in a positive light. And I'm not saying that adults are not childlike, because some of them have never had a childhood, However, it's just like, all right, I'm telling you, I'm looking at your chart. I'm telling you that I see other injuries, and you're like, you don't know what I'm talking about, right? And then some of them would over exaggerate their symptomology to go to the mental health wing because they don't want to go to general population. A lot of it had to do with just preference, more flexibility, not a lot of people in like a quadrant with 80 people in like a space. You were just you and your bunkmate in the mental health corridors. The doors probably stayed open a little bit longer. You probably got more phone time because there's not a lot of people there. It was just probably to them, clearly, more perks of being in the mental health wing. And so some men would just like be talking to me straight up. And then as soon as I start asking them about like, their mood, they just like start crying out of nowhere. But it wasn't like a buildup. It was just like, you literally saw them trying to make themselves cry. So I was just like, I'd rather make a difference with the children. Like a lot of people don't like to work with the teens. So I decided to go work, continue to work in the camp. And then I also was trying out overtime at the Juvenile Hall. So this Juvenile Hall in particular was about 10 minutes away from my house with the traffic. And I was just like, I can take the street, I can take the freeway. I need to be at this Juvenile Hall. So I went there on a weekend because I noticed that they were always short staffed. That probably should have been my first sign. But in the midst of all this, I got a taste of the halls. I got a taste of adult. I got a taste of camp. The only thing I did not get a taste of is working in the community, which came later. Needless to say, when I was working in the camp, we had what's called a multidisciplinary team like group, right? So every time a kid comes in camp, they're assigned a mental health provider to at least do their intake, unless they're mandated to do treatment and unless they volunteer to do treatment. Even though it's rehabilitative, we cannot make a child go to therapy. But if they don't start it in juvenile camp, the court can say, well, you didn't do anything in camp, so you got to do it all when you go home. So we always tell the kids that, like, hey, if it's in your conditions of probation, it may be good for you. We're not saying that they're not going to say you're not going to do it when you go home, but it may look better for you when you go to court for like your check-ins that you started treatment. So we would have most of the kids say yes, once a week or whatever. So during the midst of the kid being assigned to a mental health provider, a probation officer, going to school, whatever, they would also have a MDT meeting within the first 14 days that they got there to basically set up goals when they're in camp. That's the goal. Then they also was supposed to have they did have a MDT meeting within 30 to 45 days, at max 60, before they departed, because they needed a transitional plan, which makes sense. I realized that I really fell in love with the community linkage aspect, the talking to all people who breathe on a kid in and outside of the facility. And I got so good at, I'm going to say, like doing the MDTs and being an advocate and helping out my teammates with finding the kids referrals and communicating with the parents, because that's what I did my dissertation topic on, is successful parental involvement, especially with Black kids in therapy, but just kids of color. And so because I was seen as an asset, probation actually asked me to be the head of MDTs, under my supervisor, amongst all of my teammates. And so ultimately I end up going to more MDT meetings, and so did my friend. We had like different schedules on certain days. So we would like flip flop, but I would be like the lead MDT clinician per se. So in the midst of that, why I bring up relationship capital is that I started connecting with community agencies, and I just noticed that, the same community agencies will pop up at this particular camp. So then I went to Juvenile Hall. Juvenile Hall didn't have a transitional MDT meeting. I think they did have MDTs, but I wasn't really involved because the kids at Juvenile Hall was either waiting to serve out their time or they were waiting to go to court to be sentenced to go to camp. And so the relationship was quite different. But I stayed in contact with the nonprofit because some of the kids who were in Juvenile Hall, they didn't go to camp. And so they needed linkage to like, work resources for adolescents for some type of after school program. So what I would do is I would hit up now the executive director, but back then she was like more of a supervisor or something like that. And so I would hit her up and say, hey, we have a kid. Do you have any resources? And then I started just connecting with also LACO, which is the LA Unified School District. I forgot what LACO stands for. I'll put it like right here. But those were the individuals that would come out to the camp as well to make sure that the kid was linked to going to high school, like making sure that they were enrolled, like all those things. And so I'm a real big advocate for making sure that things are organized and making sure that everybody talks to each other, right? Ideally. So because I stayed in contact, I started building relationship capital. Then I ended up transferring to the aftercare program at one point. I did not like Juvenile Hall. I was there for 6 months. In the county, you have to, at least the rules were, you had to be in a facility for 6 months before you did an interdepartmental transfer. Again, had no problem with the facility, but this one was more the administration. Just to make a long story short, there was a 70% turnover rate. So it wasn't just me, right? It was a lot of micromanagement, a lot of, if a supervisor needed to give me feedback, on a chart or something like that, it was almost like passive aggressive, where they would CC the whole department in our jail for mental health and tell the individual therapist what the feedback was. And then it was a whole situation, which I put it in my why did I leave my 6-figure job. I'll link that below. But I broke down basically like the story of, things that occurred as to why I left. So it's a longer story. Don't want to put it in here. But it was just like a lot of, I'm going to say not caring. Like that's all I can say right now. So after I went from Juvenile Hall to Aftercare, I stayed at Aftercare for 1.5 years, right? Aftercare was cool, but I started becoming a part clearly of the MDT meetings because we were part of the transitional phase for the kids now to come home. So what's nice is I am now becoming a strong asset for Department of Mental Health, Juvenile Justice, because your girl know all the ins and outs of Juvenile Camp. And this is the thing. A lot of the therapists who I met, honestly, all of them outside of the ones who transferred with me to like these different places, all of the ones that I met, I'm gonna say 90% of them had never worked in the camps, never worked in the halls. So when they would be reading these charts, when the kid would come from the camp to the hall or go from the camp to the community to aftercare, they wouldn't know the language. They wouldn't know what it meant when the kid went to the hole. They wouldn't know a lot of the lingo from probation or mental health. And so I became like the trainer, hence what I do right now. I became the trainer of once a month. We would start tearing apart these cases, and then I would be like the consultant inside the county. I didn't get paid nothing extra, but I started, and I want you to hear this, I started to position myself to be seen as the expert so that when it's time, if I wanted to promote, I would have that under my belt. Or better yet, like what I do now, if I went outside the agency, I would have all of these things under my belt. So while I was transferring and all those things, I still kept in contact with this nonprofit, despite if I had kids going to them or not. When I did though send kids to them, and some of the kids were like recognized in like some state lunches downtown, like where the Disney Hall is and all that stuff, like downtown Los Angeles, I would be invited to it. The kids were getting plaques from the senator, from the state. Like it was phenomenal because of their turnaround, because that's the whole purpose of this program, is not just job placement, but it's also to look at this person holistically to see how they can do better in the community. And I do the training on linking them with mental health. So one day, years later, be patient. Years later, the same person the person that I was connected with, they started to be moved up in their position as well. And they said, hey, Dr. Jackson, are you able to do trauma-informed care? Now, there is a certification for trauma-informed care, right? But I'm going to let you know, depending on how paperwork is written up in a grant, you make sure you read it. If they say you have to be certified in something, then don't say yes to the opportunity unless you go and do the certification, or maybe the agency can go pay for you to do the certification, right? So I said, let me look at the grant, because I'm not certified on paper to do trauma-informed care, but I have done numerous of trainings in juvenile justice on trauma. I teach on trauma, from undergrad all the way to the graduate school doctoral programs. And so is it that they're looking for someone with experience to connect with the individuals and educate them, psychoeducate them about trauma and how it impacts them? Because I do that all day long with my training in seeking safety, ART, which is aggression replacement therapy for kids. And so even though these are adults, there are still tools that I can use to educate on top of me being from Compton. You feel me? And so they connect well when they feel like you're relatable, like people who come, and at this time it was people who coming straight out of jail and prison from like a couple of years to like 20 plus years, okay, going back into the community. And so when we read through the grant with a fine-tooth comb, there was no level of certification needed. So they just said, okay, we just need to write in your resume and your experience into the grant. So what I'm also saying is, I want to be clear. Don't get into my DMs on Instagram and my comment box saying, hey, can you help me write a grant? No, I cannot, right? Do you know the parts of the grant? No, I do not. Well, how did you become part of the grant? Easy. They had a need that needed to be fulfilled, and I was able to fulfill it based on my branding and expertise of me building up my brand across multiple years. So what happens is with therapists that I talk to, sometimes they're doing some work, in the community, but they're just doing the work. They're not positioning themselves as the expert. So you have to create your own stage, even at a job, to let people know what you're interested in, that you want to do more of. Because on most job descriptions, it says other duties. Jobs can create a whole lot of stuff for you to do if they need it, especially if they ain't got to pay you extra. I was doing a whole lot of stuff, and sometimes my positions would be split between like quality assurance and like a quality assurance psychologist and then clinical psychologists doing the work with juvenile justice. I've done that before, right? So there's flexibility if you look for it. But if you don't look for it, they're going to either go and hire someone else to do it, but you, again, position yourself as an asset, because you never know where your expertise is going to come in hand even outside the job. But sometimes we're only looking at what's directly in front of us. And because the job isn't offering any extra money, or you don't see any contracts or governments that's probably easier to get, it's just like, oh, I'm just going to do what I've been doing. And when the opportunity comes about, then I will go out and get the certification. That is backward. That's just like saying, when someone tells me that I can become a clinical psychologist, then I'll go to school. Like, what does that sound like, right? And so over time, ultimately, what that has done for me is that it has positioned me not only to work with this nonprofit. This is the nonprofit that I talk about the most, because this is the one that I've been consistent with for the longest amount of years, even though there have been gaps where I have taken breaks because maybe the grants have been fulfilled, there's no work to be done, I am a contractor. But in totality, just to give you a perspective of where your expertise can land you, not in any particular order. I've worked here clearly or with them for a long time, right? I do trauma-informed care trainings, but now I also do regular mental health trainings with not just the clientele or the community members, but also with the staff. I've also been on some of their podcasts. I'll make sure to link up all of their podcasts so that you can see the impact that we're making, honestly, just having conversations around trauma. Now, let me also put in another disclaimer. Hopefully you watch them. When you watch these interviews or these videos, whether they're interviewing me about being a psychologist or whether it's me sitting down with some of the community members because they have their own podcast and they just want to talk, you know what I'm saying? It's not a therapy session. We do a pre-chit chat, like, hey, this is my role. This is what I can and cannot do. Is there anything I need to be aware of? Because sometimes the S word comes up. Like at one point I was suicide, not me, but maybe the person that was sitting in the other chair. And sometimes therapists may think like, why is she intervening? Like, why, it's not a therapy session, right? That's unethical anyway. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is not a TV show. This is a podcast. And so we also have a debriefing and we talk. I make an effort because I have to educate them on this. Like, hey, for the podcast, we need to make sure to provide all mental health resources on the bottom of the show notes or the description box of the YouTube channel. We need to make sure to do a trigger warning every time I repost, and especially if it's something like the word suicide. Hey, young man, we just talked. Have you been to therapy? Do you want to go to therapy? Do you want me to help you find a therapist? Or I've trained the PV job staff, can they help you find a therapist, whatever, right? So I just wanted to put that disclaimer in there because sometimes looking from the outside in, that last interview or chit chat, it was just like a whole lot of trauma stuff throwing everywhere. And I'm sure as a therapist, some people are wondering probably why I ain't talking as much. I'm trying to consume as much information as I can about this young man so that I can also, because the purpose of me being there was not to talk actually about his story, even though he was going to introduce his story, which he did. But my goal on that podcast was to take his story and make it relatable for a young man or woman who's watching and they need help. Because that's why we ended the podcast the way we did. Like, what if somebody was going through something like that? Like, what is something that you can do to help them, right? And so just wanted to give that little trigger warning disclaimer. So some of the nonprofit work that I have done is I've worked and collaborated with more so from a planning phase, not a execution. We're going to work for a long period of time. I worked with a nonprofit in DC, but this happened right before the pandemic. So unfortunately, due to me not being able to go out there to physically do training the way that they wanted to, I wasn't able to continue, but I was able to share with them how to build out mental health programs for youth in the community, because that's my thing. I love building out programs, especially mental health programs, especially serving young kids and transitional age youth. Then I also have, been on advisory boards. I'm on advisory boards for 2 different nonprofits right now. One of them is on the East Coast, but it's pretty much nationwide. The other one is in Northern California. One of them is health specific, embedded with mental health. The other one is straight up mental health. I've also been a part-time clinical director, more so temporary, for almost a year, primarily because the agency was growing at such a fast rate that they needed some assistance. And so I went in there and I just helped them, from the clinical perspective, see things in a different way, work with some of the staff to put together or clean up and reorganize the therapist directory, making sure that the therapists are turning in the right paperwork so we can make sure that they are still in alignment with their licensure, malpractice, all those things. Because again, therapists, if someone that is not in the mental health field is, taking their heart and pouring it into the community, all that is great. But you are definitely needed because they may need the guidance of the actual provider, even though you may not have to do the mental health work, right? I've also just grew my position even from an intern in Northern California and was working with a nonprofit through the YMCA. And after being a practicum student, they hired me on as a unlicensed, under supervision, a therapist to work part-time with a Kaiser contract that the school had gotten. And then I also ran an after-school program with one of my good friends. We actually piloted a after-school program that helped someone that I work with still now, that I actually am on their advisory board for their nonprofit. She actually wrote out multiple grants that got these high schools multi-million dollars over years. And because of me and my friend doing something out of our heart and doing an after-school program for girls called Charm School back in the day, they used that as part of a pilot study, but we didn't know that when we started it. We just wanted to do it for fun. So I'm sharing all of this because sometimes we think that the blessings are going to come out of strategically planning. But I'm here to tell you, if you're walking in alignment with your purpose and you're following through with what lights you up, I can almost guarantee you that there will be a win, probably way bigger than you anticipate on the other side. But you have to let go of the how. You're not going to be able to predict every single move. If somebody were to have asked me when I started even my master's program in clinical psychology, would I get my doctorate? I would say, I don't know. If they were to say, do you think that you would ever, hit $1 million? I'm like, I'm just trying to hit 100,000. You feel me? If somebody were to say, did you think that you would be working with therapists all over the country? I'm like, why would I be doing that? I had no conceptualization of why would I do that? You know what I'm saying? And it doesn't mean that I was narrow-minded, because I was very much a big dreamer, but I was a big dreamer based off of what I was exposed to. And at that time, what I was exposed to is TV, and we didn't have YouTube when I was growing up. I want a big house. I want a dog. I want 2 kids. I want a husband. I want a good job. That was my dream as a child. And then when I started getting exposed to more things, thank goodness for personal development, being around great people, being around great circles, some of the circles I had to pay for to invest, to be around other great thinkers, my mind started to expand. And when your mind starts to expand, it can't go back. All right. So I hope that you really enjoyed this video of me walking you through how I've built relationship capital, not just with one, but multiple agencies, how I have been written into multiple grants because they saw me as an asset, and more importantly, how I did things out of the passion of my kindness of my heart in terms of what I like to do. People saw that as an asset because clearly I was giving to the communities and agencies that I was working with. And then me not even knowing it, it became part of my life resume. All right. So put in the comment box, what was your biggest aha moment? What is something that you can take action on? You are officially part of the End of Video Club. And so do me a favor and do like the, just do the thumbs up emoji so I can know you made it to the end of the video, like that, you know, and subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with another service provider or therapist that you know, or even healer that you think could benefit from this information, even a future therapist. That will be great. I love when I have in my comments, you know, community members, that's what I call subscribers here, where, you know, they are being influenced in a very uplifting and abundant way when they are learning from someone who has walked the walk, talked the talk, but I'm also giving information as to what's possible for them, right? So I love y'all. I will talk to y'all in the next video, and y'all probably see some shorts and a vlog of me taking y'all behind the scenes of what I do at the community. All right, bye.